Hi everyone, I'm Amoroso. I run a company called Tag Cyber and also teach over at New York University. And it's my pleasure to be here visiting with you. I have a lot of respect for Alert Communications, and I hope my comments today are helpful. A lot of experience in telecom security. I spent 30 some odd years at AT&T, both at Bell Laboratories doing cybersecurity. And then the second half of my career, almost 2 decades, I was in the top job there, including the chief security officer for the company, doing both protection of infrastructure and also doing the service strategy for home, small business, large business, government, and so on. So you have a kindred spirit here. I'm very, very, very enthusiastic for the opportunities that Alert has in the global communication service provider, also ISP. You'll see me use ISP, CSP kind of interchangeably, but the carriers, the ones that are providing services, in your case, the family, consumer, citizens, and business, small business, and even somewhat larger businesses. So the idea here is, what are some opportunities to integrate cybersecurity into the infrastructure provided by telecommunications firms? I'm going to give you an analyst view and also practitioner view. And I'll preface by saying this is something that, as you mix it up with potential customers, carriers, and I'm sure end users as well, you might hear from time to time people say, well, we've tried that before. And they may be right, but I think a couple of things have changed. I think where the recognition of threat, particularly by families and small business, might have been small to moderate in intensity, I think that's changed. I think that businesses, however small, and moms and dads with kids and families, realize that some protection is necessary. I think we finally hit that point. So the idea that maybe some of these things have been tried in the past, and you'll hear me allude to that a little bit in our discussion today, might be just irrelevant, that this is the time to do it. And I hope you do. This is, from a personal perspective, this is something that has been vocationally very important to me. I believe the telecommunications firm, CSPs, ISPs, are the right carriers of this kind of protection. And not only do I hope that you are successful as a team, I'm sure you will be. So I'm going to take you through some research that I did with your team. We spent some time with your marketing team looking at different aspects of this market. And I'm also going to give you a little bit into just the three primary architectural views. They'll be very familiar to you, but I can perhaps reinforce the fact that you are looking at the right approaches there. And then I want to say a couple things about the telecoms and where they are business-wise. And it complements my earlier comment about this being a great opportunity, because I think it's not only an opportunity for end users, and moms and dads worried about threat, but telcos need new sources of meaningful revenue. In addition to wireless and fiber, say here in the US, for example, with Verizon, AT&T, and others, business services are changing dramatically. The MPLS service revenue that admittedly drives, larger company architectures than, say, certainly citizens and homes. Those are changing. And I think it's relevant. It may not seem on the surface to be relevant because you go, hey, what I'm selling to a bunch of homes, who cares about what's happening to MPLS? But at the broad income statement level, it really does matter. So I hope you'll see that there is a linkage there, and I'll try to convince you basically that the opportunities now to take cybersecurity to CSPs globally is pretty significant. So I'm going to go to my first chart here, first research point. And the research method that we used over a couple of months was to go through and look at different types of offers in certain areas. You'll get the idea here, to look to see what was publicly available about these different types of offers. And I created a report, a research report that we worked on, the Alert team and myself. And it's kind of interesting. I'm very, very proud of the findings. And I'll share the first three charts here. It'll be just a broad summary. First thing has to do with family and home users. I think we all knew this intuitively, but it was good to go in and actually take the time to confirm our view. And that's that it's very ad hoc. What you're dealing with, from a family, from a home perspective in cybersecurity, the options that are available. Um, you can see here the current solutions are offered on an ad hoc basis with very little support to do something coherent. So if you're a family, maybe you buy some parental controls if you're worried about the kids, but that may be completely non-integrated with AV that you run on some PCs, might be different on each PC. On your devices, maybe you buy something or not. Look at as an example of something some people buy. You maybe do identity protection. You pay money. Maybe you don't even know what you're getting for it. Credit card company probably hits you up with some opportunities to protect yourself. And then maybe you do a little password protection or who knows what you're doing. But for family and home users, it's this scattering of ad hoc things that you buy or don't buy, and you'd be just as likely to run nothing as you would be to run some arbitrary set of things that maybe you heard about at a party from a neighbor. So that's a heck of a way to do things. You wouldn't protect yourself in a vehicle that way. Like I said, how are you protecting your family when you climb in a vehicle to drive to the market to buy your food? Do you just have this ad hoc, maybe I have a seatbelt, maybe we do this, maybe, of course not. It's much more methodical, much more carefully thought out. And yet, the connectivity to the internet, the way your children learn, the way family absorbs entertainment, the way you research things, the way you do your work, if you work from home, is protected on a truly ad hoc basis. So that's been true for a while. I've been saying this for a long time. But again, I think the time is right. This resonates. I bet as you're listening to me, you're probably nodding, saying that is true. Maybe it didn't matter before, but with ransomware and identity theft and other kinds of issues, often initiated, with weaknesses at the access point or endpoint, your router endpoint, the opportunities I think are significant here. So that's the first thing that came up in our research that was sort of evident. We go to the next chart, the key research point around small and I'm saying micro business here. I think there's like a definition somewhere. I think Wikipedia, like micro businesses, 10 people or less or something, and then small business 10 to 50, whatever it is. But smaller businesses have more or less the same ad hoc, very non-integrated sets of solutions. So if you ask me, hey, if I'm looking to do, say, PCI compliance, which is pretty common, I know my little company, Tag Cyber, we take credit cards when we do events, and I have to maintain PCI compliance. I do that through the bank and through the credit card company. They don't do anything else for me. They do that. I would like maybe it to be integrated. Like where most people are using Office 365 or M365 for sets of different types of, your calendar and email and collaboration, so on. And Microsoft has a resource center. Maybe use it, maybe you don't. And if you're using Google, then you're definitely not using it. But it's very ad hoc. What you use, you probably don't have a dedicated account rep. You just buy what you buy. Maybe you read a magazine article, this or that. They do HR, like Gusto is an example of a SaaS. Payroll, there's a lot of others. I use Gusto here just because it's targeted at a little company. They had some security features. They'll try and make you do two-factor, this or that. I'm listing Mimecast here for some email filtering. You might do something like BitSite, probably not. But when you would be doing it, you'd be doing it because you're maybe serving a larger customer. Let's say you are a small business and you have a customer that's a bigger business. They might ask you to do some sort of rating, which in my mind is a waste of time if you're not actually doing something. That's another good reason why the ISP can partner with small businesses to actually put some real meat behind what you're saying, maybe on a questionnaire that you do. You might be making a lot of that stuff up. Do you have an incident response plan? I don't know, right? Yes, So the questionnaire process is quite dubious in value. And then a picture of a router there. Maybe you know how to put some rules on the router if you're at home. and you have a gamer in the family, then your gamer knows how to play with the access list because to play multi-person games, you probably have to go in and tweak the rules a little bit. But most small businesses, you call up somebody, they come over, they put the router, you never touch it. You don't know the first thing about what the thing is doing or not doing. And it's weird because that is such a fundamental component of the security protection for small businesses. And we'll talk a little bit about work from anywhere versus the more traditional concept of people working in an office. Logically, there should be no difference. But in terms of the role of the access point, that there may be some architectural differences if it's a scattered small business. Like Tag Cyber, we're 30-something people, 33 people. We operate in 10 states in the US. So you can imagine we're very distributed, but I still have security needs. So this ad hoc issue is super important and non-integrated. That as you think through the value proposition for an alert offering to CSPs and to end users, I would start with, my opinion, I would start with this idea that nobody really should or really must be using ad hoc as the selection criteria for the security protections that ensure that you're not losing customer data, that you're not leaking employee information, that you're not getting hacked and losing your intellectual properties, all these things that are so fundamental. Or get ransomware, shut you down till you pay Bitcoins, terrible scenarios. And the idea that which the scattering of stuff is not reasonable. Now, partnering with your provider makes a lot of sense. You'll see, if I go to the next chart, you'll see that while on the one hand, the telecom is the natural partner here, you also have trust concerns. So let's make sure this may be primarily in the US, but I think it's a global phenomenon. When you work for an ISP, so my whole life at AT&T, you find that people sometimes, they create in their mind this issue that when you're doing telecom, your only purpose in life is to monitor somebody's communication. It's utterly ridiculous, preposterous. But you do monitor communication. That's how you do network management. I've never heard of doing network management without visibility. Of course you look. You don't care about somebody's conversation. So I'm this sentence here I'm going to read. It can't be emphasized enough that particularly in the US market, despite the fact that even though telecoms do some free stuff like the spam, plucking off of spam, which I remember putting those algorithms in years ago, despite doing all these things sometimes free, there are trust concerns that very large segments of the buying public still have with respect to their ISP. So that's something that as Alert goes and works with and advises and assists and partners with service providers, you should have that in mind because that's something they're thinking. They know that the idea that, hey, customer, we can do security for you. There is a segment of folks whose initial reaction will be, I would never let you do that. And it's ridiculous. It's something that's to be overcome. I think it can. And again, I do believe the opportunity now is significant enough that that won't be a serious enough barrier to prevent the telcos from being successful here. But let's just look, there's some things that, you know, if you're using, say in the US, Verizon or AT&T or something, they all have their resource centers. Like AT&T has a security playbook for business, kind of good. I contributed to that at one point. And a little resource center and, you know, ideas and tools you can download and so on. Useful, but still very ad hoc. Most of the providers are trying hard to deal with robocalls. That may be in some sense orthogonal to what you're doing at Alert, but you get the idea, the robocall being a big issue. Most service providers, when they drop a router onto your premise, there are either add-on or tunable options where you can select security settings that might be more restrictive. And that starts to get close to what you guys are doing. That's good. That's a good thing. Like Comcast in the US, that's not something they necessarily want to be central to the administration of the relationship with the customer. I think they'd probably rather do that with you guys. So So I think there's a good opportunity there. I listed Lumen, it's an old CenturyLink. They and everyone has security operations centers. So there's always this image that behind the curtain, there are people doing security ops, and that is true. Carriers do that and are usually quite good. And as you partner with them, you should look carefully for ways to integrate into that tool set so that you can take advantage of the tiered support structure that exists at a typical carrier. Wireless operation monitoring, same thing. I'm so T-Mobile there. And then, yes, there is often a security suite. Like in New York City, Spectrum is a very popular service provider that you, I assume, will either working with or will be working with, I would presume. And yeah, you can buy stuff from them. You know, I rent an apartment in New York City and work in New York, and Spectrum comes and they give you the brochures. And a lot of it is rather silly. You know, a lot of it is sort of awareness stuff. I shouldn't say silly, but I'm saying it's not a meaningful control. It's just a complementary thing. So, and a lot of the learning, like how to do this, how to tell your employees what, stuff like that. Useful, but still ad hoc. So look, the research here is that, you know, this opportunity, you've got customers that have need. They're buying things in an ad hoc manner. It's scattered all over the place. And this ISP is a good place to do it, albeit the hurdle of getting people comfortable that the ISP can in fact be trusted to do this. So let's shift, let's look at the three architecture cases. Again, it's going to be super, super familiar to you because this is, I think the architecture that you have is very consistent with the way the industry goes. Let's start with core. So when I say core, that can be all sorts of things. Like in a wireless infrastructure, there are all these designated interfaces that come from the 5G or 4G standard. And we all have the nomenclature. We refer to interfaces, usually a letter and a number. And everybody knows that that interface is, it's either encrypted, it's not, it's this, it's that. The security engineers and network engineers are very comfortable with the topology of a typical core. But when you drop security into the core, what you're basically doing is you're obviating the need for OTT, over the top. That's what you're saying. You're saying, look, hey, we're Verizon. We'll do this for you. Well, what is it you want to do? Oh, you want to do some controls, some access controls, some filtering. We can do that for you. We'll do it right in our core. You know, regardless of where your access, entry, or exit points are, no problem. We got you covered. We know who you are, and we can impose policy. That's real nice, you know, because it's embedded. Now, the advantage there obviously is scale. Right? When you do that, you know, it's your first choice to put things in the core because it's going to be, you know, integrated and highly leveraged. What are the disadvantages? Well, you do have to manage that, right? I mean, if you want to tailor something, then you've got to have a process for doing those one-offs. If somebody wants something a little different and it's embedded in the core, doesn't mean you can't do it. Just saying it becomes a technical challenge that you need to work out. And I know in your platform, you guys have lots of flexibility in the way these types of things might be deployed. So that's good. But that's the first thing. As you're talking to your customer, you can start the discussion around that idea that, you know, the core is important. Again, I know you do that, but that is, it's generally known. This is not just, you know, from your architecture, generally known that this is the first place a security engineer like myself would start the conversation. Can we put it there? It's your first choice. Second choice is let's go look at access, you know, and this can mean a lot of different things. As I said earlier, if it's a traditional small business or even a home, then there's a box. And increasingly it's NFV, right? Network function virtualization. The thing is hardware, generic hardware with a virtualized operating system. That's how these things work now. It's not just, you know, I'm old enough now to still assume that when I see a piece of hardware, there's a dedicated OS. That's such old thinking. But now they're virtual, so there's real estate. There's software real estate there for you to drop things. And that's the business you guys are in. And again, I'm just parroting back that it's not just that you've come up with this architect, but it's very consistent with the way telecom security engineers would think about where to put things. Now, what are the advantages? It's obvious. There's the feature set that you can drop in there onto a virtual access point. You could put almost anything. And I know you guys have some cool capabilities. I've looked, and I think it's impressive. What are the challenges? Well, it's you have to manage this, right? There's a lot of access points. I know you can do that, but support creep, that's creep as in creeping along, not a creepy person. Just saying that the support needs could go beyond cybersecurity. Like if an access point is down, then is it because of the alert software? You would say, well, no. But someone might say, well, how do I know that? And on and on and on. Like that, these are business issues, these are support issues that I know you've worked with. You guys are in this business. You know exactly what I'm talking about, that it's important. But as you're talking to the carriers here in the US, this is also an attractive option because it still can be leveraged. You're still, building out images that can be stamped out over and over again. And as carriers go to a cloud-based, centralized management scheme for their access infrastructure, it's not like the old days when you were doing BGP on routers and you had to touch each one. You had 10,000 routers that take you a week to go upgrade them all. You do that stuff in the cloud now. That's called SASE, the Secure Access Service Edge model from the analyst community. Dictates the way carriers manage infrastructure. It is a nice concept. I love the centralized cloud-based support. And I think it's funny because we all made fun of mainframes. Cloud looks like a big mainframe to me. I don't know about you guys, but if you share a generation with me, then you feel like what goes around comes around. Our devices look like terminals and the cloud looks like a mainframe. I feel like it's 1985 again, but nevertheless, the access point becomes a very attractive second option for putting the security, and you can see the relative pros and cons. The third is also something that you guys do through partnership, with Bitdefender, and you have some other partners. That's where you drop something on the endpoint. The reason that's powerful is because the use case for a family, protecting the family, is that if everybody stayed fixed in the home, only accessing the internet directly through the access point, then you're cool. But if your teenage daughter goes over to her friend's house, her girlfriend down the road, and they're in a different home, and they're maybe not protected with alert security, then that computer can become infected. You bring it back, you've gone around the control. You guys are familiar with the scenario. So endpoint protection potentially can help to avoid that scenario. There are pros and cons here, right? I mean, the primary pro is what we said. It's wide coverage and lots of partnership opportunities for you guys, additional revenue opportunities. What's the challenge? Well, that's a lot of support creep there, meaning, well, you're now dealing with software on an endpoint. And if it's a user who knows what they're doing and never going to bother you ever, but if it's my mother, she might be calling the support desk every 2 minutes for things that have nothing to do with cybersecurity. And there's a problem for any AV company that they deal with all kinds of crazy stuff on the support lines. We had this problem back in Telecom, where when you're managing the endpoint, you have no idea what they're going to be calling you about. And frankly, most of the time, it's for things that have nothing to do with service. So again, from a security perspective, these are all important options. Now, the features, I don't have to tell you guys the features that are super important. Parental control is a spectacularly important one. And having a good flexible dashboard so that mom and dad are not subject to the same policy controls that say the kids are. Kids, you want to make sure they see a safe browsing experience on the internet, stay away from inappropriate content. But for moms and dads, that can be very constraining. Like mom, it might be a reporter who needs to get to inappropriate content, sometimes as part of the work, writing articles, maybe works for a newspaper or something. You can't be sitting behind filtered internet if your business, say, is media. You can't do so. You need to have that flexibility. That's an important use case. All of the AV and filtering and monitoring and visibility, these are all things that you guys are good at. And I think you line up well. Our research into the requirements that you guys are offering, I think is very well aligned with the kinds of use cases that customers are going to bring to you. Because you guys are an international company, I would sort of highlight, and you know this already, that cultures differ. Different preferences will be very different from one place to another. Even in the US, the kinds of reaction that you might get from a family in Tennessee could be spectacularly different than a family in Brooklyn. Just different. Not better, worse, different. so the flexibility in architecture, programmability, making sure things are virtual. Like I think wherever you're making a design decision, you want it to be more virtual. Again, as you guys are out selling this, you do all of these things, and these should be discussions that are reinforced when you're visiting with clients. Now, a couple things about the carrier. It may not be evident to you. This is not the kind of thing that's always in the news or even the business press, but there is a crisis right now in telecom. That crisis being that for the last 20 years, maybe a fourth of revenue, a fourth to a fifth of revenue for a company like Verizon, that could be, I don't know, 20, 30 billion dollars, is generated through business networking. Now, we're talking maybe a little bit more here about larger business, but it does find its way down. You know, if you've got branch offices, then you're probably not a teeny business. But VPN certainly has been part of that architecture, and supplier connections back to a corporate data center. That is where small businesses make sense, and certainly VPN, big time. So a lot of money being made with these use cases: branch office, supplier, end user. And again, you guys being for home workers, you would certainly be a participant in that, maybe less in branch office. As that goes away, because think about it, in networking, we all know that data and control planes separated. Remember when that first happened on routers, that was a beautiful idea. Instead of everything in band, you separate control data. Well, you can move all the control into the cloud, and suddenly you've got cloud-based control. That is the idea around zero trust security. And that's the idea around zero trust network access, which means that you, the employee, you, the supplier, you, the customer, hitting a common resource, you hit it in the cloud, and you do it through a zero trust platform instead of VPN to the perimeter, hairpin up to the resource. People don't want to do that anymore. I'm sure in your own infrastructure at Alot, you probably already come to the conclusion that it's nice to be able to just hit the cloud directly to get your paycheck stub or to get your email. I'm sure most of you get email with just one touch or one tap onto your mobile, and you get the email. So with this changing, here's what this means. It means that you've got a new architecture, this shift to SASE, and the MPLS more or less goes away. And instead you have all these secure edges. The reason this is powerful, I think, for Alot is that the concept of a secure edge and the concept of cloud infrastructure plus endpoint is pretty similar to what you do. You know, you guys are providing edge control, core definitely, but this shift is consistent with what you do and also dictates what I have on the top of the chart here, where it says security is a major opportunity for ISP revenue growth. You may not make the direct connection from SASE to your architecture here, but from a revenue perspective, this can be a very big revenue opportunity for carriers. And I think you should reinforce that. That you never really want to talk about that when you're in a large business, but a lot of revenue is going away. There needs to be new sources. And my dream as a practitioner, also my vocation as somebody who's devoted his life to this, is that we make this happen. I hope you guys make it happen. Let's go do this. You know, you guys are in a good position. You have a nice base of customers that have demonstrated that this thing works for sure. There's a large market, certainly here in the US, but in other places that may not be using your services yet, but they should be. People like myself who do security are going to be rooting for this. Why wouldn't we? This is good stuff. And all the excuses that were given to me in the past, because I was always like you, I was always the one selling, let's do this, let's do this. A lot of them have gone away. It's not, oh, people don't care about security anymore. I heard that 1,000 times, and that's not true. So can get around that. Second is, well, the security doesn't work. Remember when AV was just terrible? It's the signature-based stuff. Well, now behavior analytics and even ML have made it work better. So you can't really just say that this junky, PC security is no good. That's not true anymore. So that's sort of a good thing. This idea that potentially people don't want to pay for security. I think we've proven that that's not true. I think that when there's the opportunity to get something that provides value and important protection, works fine. And then it goes on and on, one excuse after another. I just don't think those play anymore. So I believe that in 22 and in the years moving forward, that your team can be at the forefront here. I hope you do. There's a lot of people rooting for you to do this. And honestly, not a huge amount of competition. As an analyst, we talk to 600 companies per year. We hardly have companies banging on our door with this kind of capability. It's very unique. I was thrilled when I met your really wonderful CEO. We had a nice breakfast in New York City some number of months ago. And just chatting, and I remember just having that excited feeling that I think there's something here. This is the right time. I think he saw in my eyes that this is something I've cared about for so long. So look, I want to thank you for your time. Wish you well in your sales season. This is where I can be reached, Amoroso at tag-cyber.com. We work together. Well, we have a support contract with your company to provide assistance. So I'm always happy to help if there's some questions that people have. And once again, let me just reiterate, the opportunities are significant here. Go get them, please. We're going to be rooting for you, and we're always here to help. So again, thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great year.